We'll let you know that, this is a participation class, as everyone knows, but make sure you speak up because I can't hear. It is a lot better, but it's still not great, so I'm doing okay. What's kind of funny is I was talking to Tony. Of course, Tony ain't mowed his yard. He said, once you start mowing, you gotta keep mowing. I had to mow mine twice already this year.
I'm letting mine seed out.
The more the weeds see, is what you're doing. But it's kind of like, I'm thinking, what I'm doing any good, and then I go by the neighbor's yard and I'm like, yeah, I'm doing real good. Yes, it's like comparing yourself to someone else that sins more than you, right? So,
That's the beauty of not having any neighbors.
yeah.
I can do what I want to. It doesn't matter. No peer pressure.
That's right.
Hey, Terry,
Yes,
like in Christianity, if you feed the grass, it kills the weeds up.
that's true. That is very true. And, it's hard to understand that, but that's the truth. The weeds, just like sin, doesn't like being fed or nourished, fertilize what makes the grass really grow. But it also is not something that weeds really strive for. Kind of like if Christians, you're feeding on the word of God, that's something that really makes you grow in your spiritual life, and then it will let the weeds go out because they don't like to be there. You can't have two at one place, right? That's what God says. So that's good. Good. Thank you for bringing that up. Today, the lesson we're going to talk about, it's still, like I said, there's a lot of series in Flex. Flex is a series by a 21st century Christian. So there's a lot of good lessons there. We'll go into this lesson. And the title of the book that we're looking at is Our Rock and Our Fortress, and it's Finding God in 2 Samuel. So we'll be talking about some things there. The first lesson is Finding God in My Grief. Someone take 2 Samuel chapter 1 verses and read verse 26.
I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. You have been very pleasant to me. Your love to me was wonderful, surpassing the love of women.
Right. So there's many times in our life that we've got real close friends like David did, David and Jonathan. You say they were pretty close? Very close. So
The Bible says they were knit together.
they were knit together. So they from their whole life when they met, they've been very close. And they did everything together, you might say. So when David lost Jonathan, that was a big blow to him, don't you think? Just like if you lose a real good friend. Did David blame God? No. So that's something to think about as we get into the lesson, and we'll talk more about that as we go. And William P. Young, in his book, The Shack, tells the story of a man trying to deal with the abduction and murder of his daughter, Missy. As the story progresses, we find Missy's father on a long journey to find God and find answers. Although the book was fascinating read, one could gain at least a couple of false impressions from it. First, you don't have to go on a long journey to find God. Secondly, answers are not always the ultimate goal. In 2 Samuel 1, we find David in the middle of a real-life struggle with grief. Of all the places to start this study, grief would not be our first choice, but it's probably the right choice. Believers need to be people of depth and substance. We need to be people who are able to embrace not only the joys of life, but also the sorrows of life. God's believers are called to be non-anxious presence in the midst of a world that is all about temporal feelings. So as we journey through these dark hours of David's life, we will find that God stands firm even when it seems that our world is falling apart. Admittedly, starting in 2 Samuel is a challenge. It's like watching a sequel without watching the first movie. The first Samuel speaks of David's rise to power, and we'll cover that. David is anointed by Samuel in 1 Samuel 16. David kills Goliath and gains a following in 1 Samuel 17. Saul's jealousy for David deepens, and so does David's friendship with Saul's son, Jonathan, in 1 Samuel 18, verse 21, 18 through 21. Saul goes on a killing spree, killing the priest of God and attempting to kill David in 1 Samuel 22 through 23. And David has the opportunity to kill Saul, but relents. And Saul is humbled and backs off in 1 Samuel chapter 24. Now Saul is back after David, but once again, David is able to spare Saul's life while he and his men are in a Lord-induced slumber. Of course, Saul repents again, promising not to harm David anymore in 1 Samuel 26. And David is finally realizing in 1 Samuel 27 that Saul is not to be trusted. I don't know if you try to kill me one time, I don't think I'm ever going to trust you. But he's finally realizing that Saul is not to be trusted. The grand finale of Saul's life, Saul goes into battle with his army and his sons, and he dies by his own sword. David's best friend, Jonathan, doesn't make it out alive either. And the Philistines revel in the death of the first king of Israel in 1 Samuel chapters 29 through 31. And so this script, which Mel Gibson couldn't have written any better, leads us into 2 Samuel, where David receives word of not only the fall of the king, but the fall of his dearest friend. His reign begins with the season of sadness. So what do you think David would be feeling at this time? Because there's a great thing going on in his life, and then he lost his friend. What's the great thing?
He's finally made king.
He's going to be king. He's going to be king of Israel, which he was anointed for. Then at the same time, he lost his best friend. So what do you think your feelings in that time of life would be?
Loneliness.
Loneliness? Yeah. Yeah. He was definitely lonely because I think he was someone that David confided in. Yeah. What else?
I'd say they're mixed. I mean, you've got stress pulling in two different directions.
Right.
And so those mixed feelings just make you really wonder, what's coming next and what God's got planned for you.
Right. In your opinion, do you think it's worse to have both of those feelings at the same time than to have one or the other?
It's probably better to have a balance.
But at this, you think both of them? You don't know? It'd be kind of tough. I mean, because it's bittersweet, right? You know you're king of Israel, and then you also know that you lost your best friend.
David probably knew too that Saul would have to die before he became king. God had promised him he would be king. But also, he might have even known that Jonathan would have to die too, because he would be the apparent heir. And there might be some conflict there. I don't think Jonathan would have started it, but somebody might have.
Somebody might.
But he had to be involved in being king, because that was his job. So the worrying about the death and mourning and things like that probably had to be on the back burner,
Right.
because how important the other was.
Correct. And something I go back to, and it's kind of hard to understand, when the priests were doing their duties and someone dear to them died, what did they do? They couldn't grieve. They had to stay pure and whole. So something to think about. So you think David was kind of at that stage where he knew what he had to do, so kind of like you. How many times has the death of someone dearly loved by a leader been a breaking point of their life? Often life's most difficult blow for the Christian is not their own death, but the death of those closest to them. Bereaved means to deprive ruthlessly or by force. The real agonizing pain of death is its earthly finality. Being deprived or denied the presence of someone we love for the remainder of our lives is the most severe of all heartaches. So we can learn much from the way David dealt with this painful blow. How can we find God in our grief? These are three important elements revealed in David's painful experience that contain practical lessons that can help us cope with our seasons of grief. Our relationship with God must be strong when? All the time, but before tragedy ever strikes. Because I think that's a problem that many people have in their lives. They try to come to God when there's problems. So, and then that really, if you don't have a strong basis of belief in God and troubles come, it's what are you more likely to do?
Hate God. Hate God. You're gonna
Blame him?
blame him for it.
Right. Mhm. And we realize that God doesn't do anything evil, right? It's just things that happen in this life because sin was introduced and Satan's in this world that causes a lot of things that, we tend to blame on God if it happens to us. So you have to be very careful. We got to know where that heartache comes from. Death comes from what? Man sinning because the devil tempted and man accepted the temptation. So and that's when death came into this world. If you have read, so someone read 1 Samuel chapter 30, verse 6, please.
And David was greatly distressed, because he spoke of stoning him, because all the people were bitter and each for his sons and daughters, that they would strengthen themselves in the Lord his God.
Okay. So David was greatly stressed for the people spoke of what? Stoning him. As you just read. But he had to be strong, so what did he do? He strengthened himself in the Lord. So a lot of people that have strong faith in God, what happens when tragedy strikes your life? What's one of the first things you do?
Ask God to strengthen you.
Ask God to strengthen you. You go and you start looking at His Word. You're reassuring yourself. You're confiding in God through prayer and going to Him, asking Him to be with you and to help comfort you.
Sometimes the other extreme happens too, though. We don't confide in God. We lose our faith and our strength.
Right,
So like it happens.
right. Because then we tend to blame God for what happened, right?
I was just sitting there thinking we probably all have seen it happen, but what about a faithful elder who lives his life and his faith declines and he turns back on God, because of sad situation.
It is sad, but that's where we've got to realize that it's not God that's doing this, it's part of life sometimes.
So much you wonder if his strength didn't come through her,
Right, it's true.
She told me that he loses it.
Could have been her that kept the family true. So if you've read 2 Samuel 1 lately, you may have noticed something. God is not mentioned. You don't see the Lord or His hand in this chapter, but we know He is there. What's that other book that God's not mentioned? Esther. That God's not mentioned in, but you know His hand is there. So sometimes you just have to, understand how God acts. Back in 1 Samuel 30, the text says that David found strength in the Lord his God. We know that God is in 2 Samuel 1 because David is in 2 Samuel 1. Wherever David is, God is present as his rock and fortress. So can someone say that about you? Where you are, they know God is there because you're a child of God. You're doing what God wants you to do. You're relying on God. So that's some things to think about. When facing grief, it is sometimes difficult to see the Lord. This is why God must be our fortress before tragedy strikes. Often when our life with God is a casual Sunday go-to-meeting relationship, we are ill prepared for tragedies. We wonder, where is God? When it is not his whereabouts that is the problem. It's our whereabouts that is the problem. David's relationship with God, although it was not perfect, was a constant, consistent part of his walk. So what does the Bible say about David? Man after God's own heart. So not that David was perfect, but what did David do when he found out he sinned? He repented and came back. And as we all should. But sometimes it's our stubborn will. What do we do?
We make excuses. We refuse to acknowledge our own weaknesses.
Right. And what did David do when confronted with the penalties of sin?
He understood that he deserved it.
That he deserved it, but also did he want the penalties placed on himself and not others because he was the one that done it? And he understood that that's my sin that I need to pay for. So a lot of times we try to pass the blame, right? It's somebody else that caused me to do it or what have you. Like I said, David's relationship with God, though it was not perfect, was a constant, consistent part of his walk. In other words, it was not a Saturday go to tabernacle relationship. He worshiped, he wrote songs, he served, he prayed, because his life with God was a constant. He was able to say without any doubts that God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. And that was Psalms chapter 46, verse 1. Someone read 2 Samuel 1, 11 through 12, please.
Then David took hold of his clothes and rent them, and likewise all the men that were with him. And they mourned and wept and fasted until even, for Saul and for Jonathan his son, and for the people of the Lord, and for the house of Israel, because they were fallen by the sword.
So a lot is going on there. So has anyone heard about the 5 stages of grief? Ruth, have you, with human resources and especially, and grief can come about with the result of change, a change in work environment, a change in work positions, a change in the way things have always been done. So grief is not limited to death, but the same process takes place. So, and we can see that David went through this as well. So psychologists often refer to the 5 stages of grief. Christians sometimes view grief as a weakness or abnormality, yet we forget that these stages are evident even in the life of David. So going through these stages of grief is very important no matter what goes on in your life. Because if you don't go through all the stages, there's something that's not going to work out right for you. It's just you're not accepting the reality of what has happened. So, and we'll talk about it here in just a minute. And remember, he is referred to as a man after God's own heart. So notice the stages of grief in chapter 1. So chapter 1, verse 5, what is this stage of grief? Can someone read chapter 1, verse 5?
And David said unto the young man that told him, How knowest thou that Saul and Jonathan his son be dead?
Okay, so what would we call that? Denial. Yeah, denial, because no, it can't be. Are you sure? Are you sure that happened? You know, what did Thomas do? I gotta see him. I gotta make sure he was in denial as well. In chapter 1, verse 12, someone read that, please.
They lamented and wept and fasted until evening for Saul and his son Jonathan, and for the people of Yahweh and the house of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword.
So what stage is this one, Joe?
Morning,
Mourning, grief. So there is gonna be, as you see, denial, grief. Now, here's the stage that a lot of people get to and may never leave. Someone read chapter 1, verse 14.
Then David said to him, how is it you were not afraid to stretch out your hand to destroy the Lord of Lords?
So he is, what point of emotion is he right here, do you think? Kind of hard to understand. Angry.
You weren't afraid.
So he's very angry right now. Do you think when you look back in life changes that people have made, do you see where they never get past their anger? And they're always blaming who? Anybody? Blaming God? But they're not accepting the reality of what happened. And in most cases, it's a normal process of life that you got life and death. So, but I know sometimes people are taken early and taken before their time, but we've got to realize that, it is okay to be angry. That's part of grief, but you also have to come to the realization that you've got to get past it. What does the Bible say about anger? Be angry and sin not. Also, don't let the sun go down on your anger. And that's hard to do, especially when it's someone very close to you, like David and Jonathan. So, all right, then after anger, let's go to chapter 1, verse 26. Someone read that, please.
I am distressed for thee, my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant hast thou been unto. Thy love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women.
So, what stage is this? Say
accept
depression, because he's weeping, talking about how he's going to miss his friend Jonathan. He's accepted the fact that, of course, it's kind of getting into acceptance, but he's not denying it now. He's not in grief or anger, but now he's in depression, realizing that he's going to miss Jonathan for the rest of his life. Jonathan is now gone. So, it's and all of these stages take different lengths of time for different people, so it's not like it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's over with, so I mean, some people can go through this and it may be a week to a month to a year. You just never know. Yes, Archie.
I used to make a big mistake, because I don't know what to say when somebody wants to grieve. But I used to say, I know how you feel, and you don't. Nobody handles this the same way, so you really don't know how to feel, even though you might have been through it yourself. You don't know how to feel.
And it's hard because everybody's relationships are a little different than what ours are. Their background's different. Everybody handles situations differently. But it could be, hey, I've lost an individual, let's say a daughter, son, or something. If you'd like to talk, give me a call.
But really, they don't want to hear your problems.
No, but that's what I'm saying. If you'd like to talk, give me a call, because at least they found someone that they might not know that the same thing has happened, but at least they got someone that they want. They can call them and maybe they just want to talk to it.
But then you see David even handled death 2 different ways here. When he lost a child, he mourned before the child died. When the child died, he got up, he washed, and went back to the service. Where this one, he was in time of mourning. He was different people handle different deaths in different situations, and the closeness and what they've said to him. He knew he had sinned with the child, and he knew he
That was
in his prayers. But you got up, you knew you had to continue the service to king.
And that's what I was gonna say with his child that died, he knew that that was a result of his sin and punishment that God had pronounced on him. But the thing with that is he also knew, like you just pointed out, and he said, there's nothing I can do now. I mean, the child is gone. Now I must get up and perform my duties. And he did. He went to the Lord and he wept and he prayed and he was hoping that, the God would spare the child. But after the child died, there's nothing else he could do. Yes.
It's very, very important to realize that grief never ends. It never ends. It changes.
It changes.
It evolves. Until you can deal with it. I lost 2 husbands. I lost a son. But the grief is still there. When Chris killed himself, I didn't think I'd ever give up. And then when John passed away, I thought, oh my goodness, this is my life. This is my life. What am I going to do? Well, I got over it. Not over it, but I got, and there's still days I think of all the wonderful times that John and I had. Yet, when I married Joe, our time together was only 6 months. And I remember points, not like the others, each day in one's life, friend, spouse, whoever, it never ends. There's always something there. And when the person doesn't realize that that's not ever going to go away, it's going to change.
Right. I think that's important because, like you just said, I mean, some people are stuck in the overwhelming barrenness of grief that they never go on. Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be the memories, the what ifs, things like that. Because, I mean, sometimes you go back and think about individuals, and
but you don't dwell on it.
Right.
I think of when Chris was a little boy, and how funny and how sweet he was. But he was distressed before the police. He was a sick man.
Yeah.
And his death was really difficult for him.
I'm sure.
But I just tell people that, what they say, where's the Chris? Just lie to do. That's just the best way I can describe is that my son lost a lot at the end of his time, and they looked at me like I'm crazy.
He didn't think he had any hope.
But that is what happened.
That's
Exactly what happened.
good way to put it.
And there wasn't anything that anybody could do at the time because he had made his decision.
Right.
And there's so many people say, well, he's lost, he's going to hell. I don't think so. I don't know. I'm not a judge.
Right.
I have to hope that God has a special place with people who do things like that.
So it's hard to get over a lot of things like that.
Sure.
Pete, did you have something?
Well, as I walk through this life, and all of us do, we lose people from around us. And as I survey things and as I grow older, I see the reward at the end if they live the life the example of Christ. It's not easy to turn loose, but there's comfort in that. And I lost all my parents are gone, all my grandparents. I've got 4 siblings gone. I've lost them in different ways. And I found out I hang on to the good things, just as we're talking about, and especially on the birthdays, and especially on certain holidays. And I talked to my sister some about it. It's I've learned to go from understanding what God is to draw upon, because just share with y'all, I nearly died when my daddy died. I shut down. They put me in the hospital for a week. And because my daddy was my best friend. And, but then at the end, you know what rallied me was my family around me, my church family, my family. And that's different grieving. And turned loose, and I realized that was part of life, because I'd never really faced with death before that way. But we got to realize we got to rely on each other to walk through these times of depression, times to rely on each other, just to lean up on the shoulder and cry sometimes. That we learn in different things, like I said, different people in your lives bring different things to us. And this is the same way with David. David had deep love for this man. And I could see where he was in deep depression. And the only one who could pull him out of that was God. And him looking towards God for this.
I think us having the faith that will bring us through it, and not that it's gonna be easy, you know, because we are human and we are gonna miss or go through grief, but it's how we handle it based on God working in our lives and our strength that we have through God. So, someone get chapter 2 of 2 Samuel chapter 2, verse 1.
And it came to pass after this, David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I go up to any of the cities of Judah? The Lord said to him, go up. And David said, whither shall I go up? And he said, unto Kir-Hurim.
So I think this is just like the example that Pete brought up earlier about David's son. What happened here? And Joe, you said that earlier. This was acceptance. So you've got to accept what has happened and go on with life. Go on with what you're supposed to do. Go on with what God wants you to do. Again, when other people are grieving, we often act as if these stages are not normal. That's the way we act a lot of times. Phrases like, I have to be strong, or they are at peace now, or even more popular, this must have been God's will, so I need to have faith, are common during times of grief. But these statements are way off base. Grieving is not a sin. Even Jesus grieved. How do we know Jesus grieved?
He cried with Lazarus.
Jesus wept, one verse, Jesus wept. And he cried over Lazarus and his mother. So and what did it say? Jesus had compassion, you know, so we know that Jesus grieved. The challenge is making it from stage 4 to stage 5, because what happens, a lot of people get stuck in depression, right? And sometimes it's hard to come out of that depression. Pete, like I said, you had to go in the hospital, right? Just because mentally, does that affect your physical?
Yes.
Very much so. So I think that, you know, sometimes we've got to be careful and realize the signs of depression and seek help if needed. Gail?
Again, if a person is normally plagued, well, I have chronic, major clinical depression that I have been medicated for since I was 10 years old. And it's something that when you already are depressed and then something comes along, man, that just knocks us off something.
Imagine.
You know, and no, he went into the hospital. Been there, done that. But again, you gotta take care of. Well, John used to say, in his have a broken arm, what do you do? You go to the doctor and get it treated. When you have a broken head, when you're sick, when you have depression, when you have anxiety, what do? You go to the doctor and get well.
Right. And I think a lot of people don't realize that that's a real disease, real issue, because mentally sometimes we gotta be fixed there too for depression, and realizing that you're depressed and seeking help is very important. And again, for all of us with working around people, seeing people, do you know most time when something's bothering somebody?
You can tell sometimes.
Sometimes, I mean, not all the time, but sometimes you can tell. Is it important to step in or see what you can do?
Terry, I've got some young men that work for me, and you get to know them well enough to know that something bothers you. You know, they'll come in, they'll come by and just say hi. Just make an effort to come by and see me, say hi. I said, everything all right? Oh, yeah. Probably about 30 minutes later, they come back and say, you got time to talk? You know, sometimes that's all we need to say is give an opening, that everything all right? We need to talk. I mean, and these young men are going through young marriages and loss of babies and adjusting to marriage life and loss of parents. And it's a lot of different things. And it's not that I'm there to counsel them. I'm just there to encourage God's word and God to make everything be all right. If they rely on God, put God on first.
And it's amazing to know your people that you work with. And I've had several examples of that as well, where, you know, I call one up, say, hey, let's meet for lunch. And I said, and we'll start, hey, what's been going on? I know that, you know, something's bothering you, and I can tell. And then we start talking, and, you know, they're so relieved that they can talk to you, really, and let you know what's going on. And then they'll come back, hey, I appreciate what you did and talking to me. And I was just in a little bit of a depression, just couldn't, you know, just a lot of times, I guess, doing same old, and sometimes you just need a little encouragement, especially in sales. When you're not making sales, that kind of can get to you. So you got to be very careful. And Johnny couldn't sell a suit at Sears. Yeah, but so because why is that? Because you keep getting told no, right? No, or nobody's making it. So we've got to be careful and open to what other people are feeling around us. So healing is a process that at times can be slow, but is promised by God in 2 Samuel chapter 2, verse 1. David moved to the stage of acceptance by resuming his fellowship with the Lord. So David continued to fellowship with the Lord. This can be difficult. Often people have difficulty praying, opening the Bible, or walking in a church building while going through the grieving process. Much of this comes from being told it was God's will. We need to be careful not to blame God for something He didn't do, because it can give those grieving a negative impression of Him. Although the losses we face may not always be His intentional will, He can bring a blessing from it through. Let's read Romans chapter 8, verse 28. Someone get Romans 8, 28.
All things work together good. Hey, I'll close it.
Okay.
All things work together for good to those that love the Lord and are called according to His purpose. I was just thinking about that because when I was at Sunset, we actually went through a class of how not to use this verse.
Yeah.
And during grieving that people are going through, that's probably one of the worst things you can say is well, it all works.
It all work out. It's going to be good.
You know, because it works for good, and it's in God's time and planning and all this. And we're not saying throw out God's word. We're just saying use it in an appropriate way at an appropriate time. And as we do so, people are changed in a positive way instead of looking at God in a negative way. And I don't know, and I was thinking about what Archie said about, I know how you feel and all that. But I think it's important for us to empathize with people if we've been through like situations, but not say, I know exactly how you feel and all this. Well, I've been through this, and I can't help but think about the time we were at Sunset and I was grieving. It wasn't over a death of a person. It was over the death of my business. And it went on the entire time I was at Sunset. We thought we had it prepared to hand it over, and this, that, and in 9 months it was gone. And I had people on Sunset Inn telling me, well, there's freedom in that and all that. Well, that's 25 years of my life
Just
gone. All my equipment, all my tools, everything. And I found myself, I think I was stuck on 3 for a long time. I was angry about the whole situation, and there is freedom in that. I see that, but when it comes down to it, it's very easily, you can very easily fall into a depressed state of mind because for a long time, that's who you were, that's what defined you. And I think God showed us that we're defined by Him and not the things of this world, but still, 25 years on the sign out front and people relating to me for that and using that as outreach ministry when I became a Christian, it was hard to just let go. And it's just
a large part of your life, it was a death in some sort of sense.
Yeah, and we never shared it with anybody, and I'll share it here, but we would sit home at night, going through my studies and all that, and we'd start talking about it and just start crying, and because we were heartbroken.
Yeah.
And having to, y'all could probably understand how hard the studies were there. I mean, it was intense. And I had no time. Robin told me the other day, she said, I don't remember my son calling and saying I'm having trouble. There wasn't anything I could do, financially, or I couldn't leave school. I was committed to it. But she said, he would tell us that all the time, and I would just tell him, there's nothing I can do. And and we had to make peace, my son and myself, and I'm fine with it. I don't think he is, because he feels like he let us down. But in the long run, there is freedom in that. All my health issues from being at the shop all the time, not to mention the stress and all that disappeared when that left, and still dealing with some with my back and my foot pain and all this, but the grief over something like that, it can be devastating too.
Right.
I think it's important for us to understand as counselors of God, as teachers of God, we need to be understanding to people when they bring up stuff like that. Just to tell them, I don't know exactly what you're going through, but let me tell you something. And tell them your story. And tell them how you dealt with it. We dealt with it. I can't remember the verse now, but there's a verse that says, be strong and courageous in the Lord, and He'll get you through things, and fear not, for He's with you. I had that posted in the parsonage where we live, probably 10 or 12 places. And every time we turned, we would see that. And did it help me? Sure, it helped me. Did it completely get me over what I was feeling now? No. But it definitely helped.
And I think that shows where not only does, come through death, it also comes through changes in life, things that happen to us. So very, very important. Let's see. And next week we'll we'll talk about finding God and life's transitions. But as we said, grief's certainly not the most pleasant place to start a study, but it's a good place. Before we can ever find God, we have to get rid of those things that are blocking Him from our vision. For many, that is grief from the loss of a loved one, grief from the loss of a job, grief from the consequences of sin, yours or someone else's, and grief from a divorce, even grief from a disappointment with God. So let's just think about it. We've got to deal with that grief and get through it. And again, none of us are professionals, but if you'd like to talk to someone, the elders are here, preachers here. I guess Joe's a professional. But thank y'all for participation in class.